Welcome to the Patient Voice and Linguistic Validation Café podcast, a place to gather, connect, learn, and grow together by creating community, embracing our cultures, and sharing our passion for patient voice research and linguistic validation. This is the space and time we take to embrace diversity and discuss how to improve the human aspects of health communication, clinical outcome assessment science, and medical translation. This is episode 8, Patient Voice Research Unlocked, Part 2, Debunking the 3 myths, empowerment, shared decision-making, and equity to elevate the patient voice. With our special guests, Mark Gibson, Patient Voice Research Specialist, Arletta Różańska, Social Psychology Mentor and Medical Translator, and Eva Nyblom, Traveling Nurse and Linguistic Validation Consultant, with our moderator Rachael Lee, Language Editor and Linguistic Validation Consultant. I am your host, Nur Ferrante, and this is the Patient Voice and Linguistic Validation Café.
This episode is sponsored by GRC, putting the patient at the heart of research globally.
Well, welcome everyone to this episode 8 of our podcast, Patient Voice Research Unlocked Part 2, where we are going to be talking about debunking the 3 myths, empowerment, shared decision-making, and equity to elevate the patient voice. And today with us, Mark Gibson, Arletta Różańska, and Eva Nyblom as guests, and Rachael Lee as moderator. So super welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves as usual. So Mark, would you care to say a few words about you?
Yes, I'm Mark Gibson. I'm a health communication, readability kind of specialist, and I've been doing patient research. While you were talking, I was thinking, when did I start? And it was 1996, so 29 years ago, which is too long. I've been, after years and years of being quiet, I've been engaging a lot on LinkedIn, and that has been because Noah has forced me to do that.
Yes, because Mark, for those of you who don't know, owns Gibson Research Consultancy company, and it's been around for many years, and it's really something to look at. And you have as well plenty of experience with patient voice research, which is a field for us incredibly interesting, not only professionally, but as human beings and as patients. So it's really great that you have decided to, step up and share with all of us all your knowledge and experience. We're very, very grateful. Yeah.
Our pleasure.
Sure. Thank you. And Arletta, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm Arletta Różańska. I've worked as a linguist in different capacities for 25 years already. I'm a French philologist by trade, so my starting point was literature and philosophy. But then I transitioned to legal and regulatory texts and earned my sworn translator stripes 20 years ago. To segue then to scientific research articles, bioethics, social psychology, and of course medical translations. I've served as a mentor in a university level social psychology course, and I've joined linguistic validation course offered by Nur, so I'm student again.
Wonderful. Yes, Arletta, you're one of our students now, but you are really an expert in diversity and cultural, let's say, linguistics. And so it's really precious to have you here, that you have accepted the invitation. And so we're looking forward to the conversation. Thank you so much. And Eva, we have Eva. I never know if it's Nyblom or Nyblom. I don't remember how to pronounce it.
It depends on which language, I think. In Swedish, we say Eva Nyblom.
Nyblom.
Yeah. In English, it will be Nyblom.
Okay, Nyblom then, because you are from Sweden. Okay, so let us know a bit about yourself.
I'm a nurse focused on anesthesia, intensive care, children. And I spent my years mostly with children in hospitals. And I've been working worldwide then. So I learned English, French, and Italian. And when I moved back to Sweden, 2010, I was routine in my job, and I said, why not focus on languages? And since 2012, I have been doing cognitive debriefing for different companies and translation, medical translations, and so on. And a year ago, I came across Nur, so I took the course on LVC then. And yeah, now I'm getting pensioned from the nursing job and focusing on LVC.
That's really wonderful. We really appreciate you being here today, because your perspective as nurse with all of your experience, but also as linguistic validation consultant and translator and patient, it's really precious, and I'm sure will add a lot to our conversation on these myths that we are debunking, or at least considering. Thank you so much. And Rachael, our moderator, just tell us about yourself as well.
So hi, I've been a freelance French to English medical translator for about 30 years, just over 30 years now. I started in-house with a company that specialised in pharmaceutical and regulatory work. So I've basically been doing that for about 30 years, and only sort of crawled out of my office about a year ago. Joined LinkedIn, did some training with the SFT, and it's been really lovely, you know, sort of meeting like-minded people, discovering Nur's course. I'd worked in linguistic validation on various steps of the process for about 15 years, mainly back translation, reconciliation, review meetings with developers, and quality control. So it was really lovely to have a whole sort of overview of the process, and especially to learn about cognitive debriefing. And I really I'm really enjoying the patient, you know, the human side of the work, you know, sort of seeing, I don't know, the real benefit it can have to patients, you know, rather than just sending off a Word file, you know, to my clients, but to, you know, I'm really enjoying interacting with patients through cognitive debriefing and thinking about how everything we write matters. You know, it has, you know, we've got such responsibility as linguists to make sure that our words do no harm and have a positive effect on patients' lives. So I really love that side of the work. And I also teach. I've been teaching on a master's in translation in Paris. I was able to create a course on medical translation. So I've been briefly looking at clinical trial translation, regulatory translation, basically a crash course over about 8 weeks, introducing students to the sort of methodology of medical translation, and touching briefly on linguistic validation as well as a, you know.
Wonderful. Our like voicing our community and making it grow, and that's really wonderful. And I see that, well, as we had, because this is the second part of
the previous podcast that we had on patient voice research, and it's really a discovery for many of our community to consider that this is an area where, well, cognitive debriefing, as Mark has explained to us, it's within patient voice research, right? But it's something that we may not have considered as a path, and also makes us rethink cognitive debriefing, and maybe as again he has mentioned, a research activity and not only a checklist, right? So it's much more, our work is much more impactful and precious. So that's really wonderful. Thank you, Rachael. Well, I leave the floor to you because you're the moderator. So there we go with our topic of debunking the 3 myths.
Okay, so where are we going to start? We're going to look at debunking the common myths then about patient voice research and how we can actually achieve empowerment, shared decision making, and equity in practice. So I guess we'll start with patient empowerment. What does that actually mean? Is it something that's been achieved, or is it a goal that, you know, we're still aiming for? And in what way would you describe it as a myth? Whoever
Mark, would you want to start?
Apologies, I had myself on mute. So one of the reasons why I suggested these topics is because, you know, you can't go into patient voice research when what I mean by patient voice research is the kind of higher level qualitative depth interview scenario with patients. You can't do that without having a grounding about what it is. And I spent a lot of the past 2 years, 3 years, just, you know, the post-COVID years, basically, just going from conference to conference, and there were 2 themes that were common, and one of the people were saying one thing or the other about AI, which basically causes eye rolls now in 2025 because it's nothing impressive to use AI in your work. You know, if you're not using AI in your work, you must be daft by now. The second one is just some slogan or other about the patient voice. So, you know, you would go from booth to booth, and all of these mutually competitive companies pretty much have the same slogan: elevating the patient voice. And that included companies that I know have no grounding whatsoever in research, and they're just using this as something to hang their colours on, you know, just to find a new something. You can't enter patient voice research without understanding the building blocks of what it is. And those building blocks are assumptions. So a lot of the patient voice agenda are based on assumptions, and those assumptions are, which we call myths: patient empowerment, shared decision making, and equity, or equality. So patient empowerment is almost like a Russian doll of assumptions within assumptions within assumptions, because you can't be empowered. Put it another way. The rhetoric is that you are empowered because you have all of this access to information, and that we have the critical ability to tell good health information from bad health information. Well, you know, 5G causes COVID, and the fact that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people believe that, or that a vaccine will turn you into a gorilla or give you gorilla DNA, which was something that was going around COVID, and just all of the belief in the disinformation in the wake of, or during and in the wake of COVID, proves that we don't have the critical ability to deal with this information. And also we're outsourcing our critical thinking ability to tools like ChatGPT. It does the thinking for us now. We used to call it the Google effect. And it has had a concrete effect on our short-term memories. It's a fact. So all, in many respects, technology as well plays its part in making sure that we're not empowered. And so what is patient empowerment? Patient empowerment means that you have the cultural capital to see yourself as a partner with the doctor, or see yourself as an active participant in a clinical study. I will focus on the healthcare professional patient interaction because it really is, it's the same analogy within clinical studies as well. So we have, you need to feel that you are on an equal level with the doctor or the healthcare professional in order to be able to actively ask questions and that kind of thing. You need to have a high level of health literacy. You need to be literate as well in the traditional sense. You need to be culturally and linguistically fluent, not just in the language in question, but in the speech, the voice of medicine. How interaction is conducted in a doctor-patient setting, and so you need, and the list goes on. You need to have this and that and that. And in actual fact, if you look at who is empowered, it's a very, very narrow demographic in most countries. It is middle to upper middle class people, higher education people living in suburbia or peri-urban areas, so that's the thing about. I mean, that's breaking the myth of patient empowerment. Really, it's not happening for the majority of people.
Yeah, maybe we should just take a closer look at patient empowerment and just to try and find what may seem to be the trouble. Why is that we have what you called the other day the white privilege, and the vast majority is not empowered? And the way I see patient empowerment, we can think of this construct as in three dimensions, like the first one being intrapersonal, that takes into account how the patient sees themselves and how they represent their ability and competence to control the management of their condition. Is the patient literate enough to have the conversation equal to equal with the medical staff? The second dimension would be behavioral. That describes what actions the patient takes to exert control over what's happening to them. Do they have this capacity? And the last one, the interactional, that considers the, I'd say, environment the patient has to deal with during the care process. And here, I would argue that we have plenty of undercurrents of prejudices, biases, stereotypes that may preclude what I would call therapeutic empathy that I believe is a prerequisite to shared decision-making and equity. And all these mind bugs, I would call them mind bugs, they all feed on inputs from culture, family, religion, ethnicity, and well, we just operate on unconscious mental pilot that we just have blinkers, and sometimes this limits us with our perspective.
Yeah, you're tapping in a very into very well important issues, and the cultural one that is one of the main topics for us, and also makes me think of intracultural and intercultural issues, and also immigrants in the country, but also not only patients but also doctors, because for example in Spain we have many doctors from other countries because we just don't have enough specialists, and also they bring their own biases, their own cultures, and then issues regarding accessibility as well, that patients just didn't have enough health literacy, or they don't speak the language, and so on. But I like especially the three categories that you have indicated, right? Intrapersonal, behavioral, and interactional. And the interactional in relation to religion, culture, and ethnicity. And here we have, well, different cultures represented in this community. And we have discussed previously different issues that happen regarding the countries. And this makes me think of patient empowerment as very different from culture to culture, country to country, but even region to region, and how we can really tap into those issues, because they are at different levels. And it's also, well, as Mark has indicated many times, we are a culture of one, and how intrapersonally the patient is willing to empower themselves, because sometimes there are so many barriers, like fear of questioning the doctor, or taking your own, let's say, lead into all the process of healing or curing. That maybe here Eva can add something in relation to how patients, when even asked to make their own decisions, are not willing to make their own decisions and leave it to the doctors or nurses. And so it's a really a complex picture that we need to tap into all those areas, and not just the issue of patient empowerment as trying to stimulate the patient to have a voice or be more, I don't know, do more advocacy and fight for their rights to be heard and so on. Is much more detailed and vulnerable at the same time. So maybe, I don't know, Eva, would you like to add your perspective as nurse, patient, and linguist to this?
I'm continuing on what Mark said during the COVID time and the vaccination. Everyone was out of empowerment. We were forced to do vaccinations because we had to protect ourselves and so on. But the vaccination came a little bit later. When it started, I would say all doctors were very humbled because they faced something they never seen. And how are we going to treat this, and how are we going, especially how are we going to protect ourselves not getting contaminated? So it was a lot of frightening around this, and the whole thing about empowerment just was falling down, and it was a very special situation. Then we came to the vaccination, and people were forced to do it because they weren't accepted in society if they didn't vaccinate themselves. It was groups in Sweden who refused, and they managed to not getting contaminated in the first period, but maybe not in the second, but in the third. It was only those who refused vaccine that were sick, so they came anyhow. So we could see the pattern in what we were forced to do and the result of it in one way or another. But everything was out of control. We didn't know, as Mark said too, we didn't know what was the vaccine about. We were all a big group of test persons in one way or another, without control. Of course, they took my ID and so on when I went to the vaccine, and they reported the status afterwards. So they got a lot of statistic, the researcher I'm talking about now, presenting these vaccines. But it was not with any, if you say, patient voice-based research at all. That's what I can say about the COVID time.
I'm thinking now, Eva, because you're an itinerant nurse or a traveling nurse, no, as anesthesia nurse, and you have been working in different countries, attending patients. So how have you seen differences of patient empowerment in the different countries that you have worked in?
I could say I worked in Saudi Arabia. There was no patient voice at all. It didn't exist. Everyone was a kind of test person. And I worked with children, and the mother was usually beside them. And when I wanted to explain for the mother the situation the baby was in, I had a male translator from English to Arabic. But after a while I understood he was not translated at all. Because I said this and this condition and it may be good, blah, blah, blah. And he said only, Alhamdulillah, Inshallah. That was the information the mother got. And if we compare with Sweden, we are quite open-minded in that way. We don't have this, how to say, the doctor is up there and then comes the nurse and the patient is far down. It was earlier, but everything is gone at the moment. You can talk to the doctors as I talk to my colleagues. There is no difference. But of course, there are, I would say, there are differences between the persons. If we talk about the person itself, we cannot talk about the doctors as a group. You have different personalities among the doctors. Some maybe they are stressed talking to people. Others are more relaxed talking to people, and then are talking to people as me as a nurse or as together with the patients. So it's not only based on doctors' patients, because sometimes I can meet doctors talking perfectly well with the patient. And also the same with the patient. Some are very afraid of asking questions. Some are asking too many questions, you may say. So it's difficult to say. In Sweden, anyhow, we are more open-minded. When I was working in Caribbean, it was based on American. There they had always the thought they will sue me. And this is the way they worked. They have to cover themselves before they can do something. Otherwise, the lawyer will come and visit me, and it will be costly. So it's many different ways. And if you didn't listen to, I was in the ship nurse and on cruise years, and if you didn't listen to the passenger who came to the hospital there, you counted 1, 2, 3, and that's the response came. The lawyer was there. They put up different possibilities. All was already prepared. If they come and tell you this, oh, we're giving you travel. You can have a free travel. So it's many ways of meeting this conversation, I would say, between the patient and the healthcare providers.
Because it's like a tug of war in the end. No, it's like when patient empowerment becomes, let's say, patient attack, or to extreme self-defense, as if the doctor were the enemy and they throw you the lawyers and the medical staff feel threatened, and so empathy cannot happen, connection cannot happen. There's this breaking of any possible relation, and you're trying to help someone that is attacking you, and you don't know how to help them, and at the same time you need to defend yourself. So it's, to me, it's important also because sometimes we make patients victims, and also we idealize the patient as, and we want to give them voice, yes, but also it's like recognizing all the aspects of that empowerment and how that empowerment can turn into extremes where it becomes damaging. And empowerment has to do with a more balanced relationship, a more equal, no? Because if the doctor is here and the patient is here, but then if the patient moves up here, again, we have another tug of war. And just to place them in a relation of balance and mutual respect and understanding. So
I used
that's,
to say humility is the word.
yeah, mutual humility in both cases.
Humility.
In both cases, I guess.
And
Yeah, I think that the dynamic is truly complex because we can't assume that a patient has, let's say, technical competence. They usually don't have. But at the same time, patient needs to have this relational and emotional competence that they can trust the medical staff that makes calls for them. So there's truly a complex dynamic that we need to find some kind of a balance between technical competence and relational and emotional, I'd say.
I think as well, perhaps some patients, they, if they get diagnosed with a serious illness, they'll probably feel quite lost and won't know what they want or what the options are, or they won't have any knowledge of what's available, so they go in blind, and some patients can just want to have someone they can rely on to make decisions that are good for them. And it's so difficult because there's so much information out there, you know, on Google, and how do you, I don't know, I guess we can't generalize, and every situation's very different. I guess it's identifying the patient's needs, what they want, how they want to proceed, and having healthcare professionals that will listen and take the lead or partner with the
I
patient.
think you're absolutely right. There's the thing in health psychology and medical sociology that talks about biographical disruption of the self. You know, when it can happen. You know, if you've been to war, you've got to put yourself back together again. There was a before and after, divorce before and after, bereavement before and after, and it's exactly the same with a diagnosis of, for example, a chronic illness. There's a before, and then there's the middle state where you're absolutely destroyed and you have to put yourself back together again, and then there's a future self of you haven't put yourself back together again. And it's that space in between that Nur and I've been discussing this a lot. It's like a liminal space where treatment often fails. You're just left. I'm sure all of us have had diagnoses where it's like, well, you know, what happens now? And I think one thing I want to say about patient empowerment is that the assumption of the patient empowerment as it is manifested in the patient voice agenda is a very Western model. And if you have a look at a lot of questions in clinical outcome assessments where it's about autonomy, it's about coping, it's about being able to cope on your own. And those are signs of empowerment in Western cultures, and seen as really positive, but it's not seen that way in pretty much most of the non-Western cultures out there. So autonomy isn't necessarily a good thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are empowered. The empowerment comes through the community, and that is completely missing from clinical studies.
Yeah, I think you just touched on a very sensitive and important area, which is community. It's really when we have community that patients can empower themselves, but not only through patient advocacy groups, which of course that's one of the direct steps where they start understanding their illness, have other people feeling the same way, family members, etc., resources, but also community in the sense of their own family, their own friends that are able to understand and support them, and the medical community that is really listening. And also it has made me think something Rachael said about, the patient being vulnerable, and a phase of this process of illness is fear, and fear brings anger. And that's the part where you want to sue the doctor, you need to blame it on someone, you are so scared that you are attacking everything around you. And I see a lack of sometimes understanding from the medical staff of all these phases that patients go through. And they really, I mean, we are asking a lot of doctors and nurses. We are overburdening them and making them psychologists, the spiritual counselors, and things where they may not be ready for. There is a lack in hospitals of services that may cover this in a very, let's say, comprehensive way. Families are scared. The patient is seen, in a situation where all their families or the family is just crushed with the with all that is happening. And it creates trauma in the end, and trauma separates and severs any possibility of a smooth process of healing. And I see that there is I don't know, it's Natalie, you expressed earlier emotionally intelligent or emotional intelligence that is required also from doctors. So I see even the medical training is not covering the needs of a society that it's with a huge level of sickness and is not able to cope with all the complexities of, let's say, that the modern patient, needless to say, in different cultures and countries. I remember a situation that you, Eva, mentioned in Saudi Arabia, and I had absolutely forgotten about this, but many years ago in 2005, I went to India and I was a volunteer in, it was called the Hope Project, and it was in New Delhi. And it was a minority of Muslims living in New Delhi. And it was a school with a clinic for little girls, because, well, as you know, in India, little girls are many times abandoned or burnt or things like that. And they would gather them. It was a Sufi community that was funded with German money. And well, they had this clinic, and the doctors there, women doctors, were trying to explain the mothers and also the caregivers of these little girls about the period and basic women things. Well, there was like a, I don't know how to say it in English, but it was like a great turmoil, and all the men, when they found out that this was happening, went with sticks and stones and everything, and they attacked all these women doctors, and they forced the clinic to be closed just because, well, they were doing this. And that was, to me, a clash of cultures in many ways, and of one culture, Western culture, bringing their, let's say, all their ideals and ideas, and trying to empower these women in order to well, have more knowledge of their bodies, and, as you know, and all this huge resistance. And of course, it was tapping into issues of taboos, and very, very harmful and very traumatic for everyone involved. And that makes me think that I would like to ask you, Mark, that you have written about this in many of your articles, but when we try to Westernize and to bring patient empowerment where it's not ready in the way that we want to bring it, and we may cause much more, at the same time, I understand the aspect of fighting all of that, and all this situation for sure brought all Muslim women there to reconsider, but at the same time, well, all these, let's say, spring revolutions or issues of the sort. But what do you consider in relation to this topic of trying to empower through Western views? I'm very interested in knowing that.
Yeah, I think what you described is a very typical top-down effort, I'm very interested in health promotion. I don't do enough work in it, actually, and I would love to pivot 100% to health promotion. So if anyone's listening, but I think you got all of Western initiatives of this type, empowerment initiatives, they're all tinged with imperialism and top down, and us telling them how to live. I don't mean to come across as particularly lefty or anything like that, because I'm not, but I'm very sensitive to this issue because it's a matter of past success or failure. If it's top down and there's no engagement with the local population, you might be armed with a load of translations, leaflets in this case about periods and about puberty and that kind of thing, and changes that happen to girls. And that might be translated perfectly well, but if it doesn't resonate with the communities, then that is where the problem is. And the only way you can do that is through bottom up rather than top down. It's bottom up, it's engaging communities. And obviously you have to do all kinds of fact finding in advance. You can't just turn up to somewhere and say, right, we're going to be white saviors here, like Live Aid. One concert solves all the problems of Africa forever. Lovely idea, but it just doesn't. It's almost cringeworthy now. Very lovely idea, but it's just not workable. And the only way you can do that is by, yes, okay, so an initiative might originate with an organization in the West, but you have to hand over the design of all of that to local people, local experts. You need to get the buy-in from communities. In the literature behind me is tons of books on health promotion, and all of them talk about community engagement and engaging like elders and that kind of thing. And one of the things that, again, it's assumptions within assumptions. So, but one of the things that we have to be careful about is that the literature talks about these community elders and that kind of thing, those type of people, as if they are really upstanding people. And in most cases, surely they are if they're leading the community. But there can be occasions where there could be a bunch of wrong-uns, people who are not good, who are not good people, who would buy into things like the stigma. And the only way that you can navigate yourself around that situation is by the local knowledge, bottom up local knowledge. And it's the same thing with clinical outcome assessments, where there isn't any thought into how a lot of items are going to be processed, particularly about taboo items. There isn't any thought about it. The assumption is that, okay, these questions are going to be asked in a clinical setting. So the assumption is that the patient who is a volunteer in the clinical study will be attuned to how healthcare works in the West, basically. So it doesn't matter where the eCOA or eCOA has been deployed. It could be Manila, or it could be Bhutan, or it could be Burundi. What it is basically an exporting of a Western ideology, essentially, just by the question constructs. So again, it needs to be just very deep local initiatives, deeply local initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
It's also important because we are steeped in our respective cultures, and when one thinks of mind in here and culture out there, the membrane is permeable. We just absorb and we are infiltrated, but by attitudes of the culture out there. What's complicated even more the picture is that much of our behavior is driven by unconscious mental processes. So if we don't take a step back pause and think what we're saying, how we behave. We just tend to operate on an autopilot, and all kinds of implicit biases just kick in, like, for example, affinity bias. We are pre-programmed to prefer people that are similar to us, that they look like us, and that are from the same culture. It's just we are wired that way. I remember Eric Kandel, a neuroscientist and Nobel Prize winner for his work on memory. One was pressed to offer an estimate how much the mind works unconsciously. Do you want to guess? His answer, 80 to 90%. It's a huge percentage that we work just, that so many processes and so much of our behavior is guided by unconscious mental processes. It's a huge percentage, but we are not helpless, and we can change and lessen the grip of some of these mind bugs on us. I would like to read you a riddle. Bear with me, just 3 lines, and I will show it to you that we can change and things can get better. Okay. A father and his son are in a car accident. The father dies at the scene, and the son, badly injured, is rushed to the hospital. In the operating room, the surgeon looks at the boy and says, "I can't operate on this boy. He's my son." How can this be? What do you think?
Well, it was his mother.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. And back in the 80s, this stereotype was so ingrained, so strong, that it puzzled even some social psychologists, self-proclaimed feminist. Not anymore. Not anymore. And it's a big win.
You find
That we are not doomed.
you guess very quickly, Mark. Yeah, you don't have that stereotype. It's clear.
No.
That's good.
No.
But back then, if surgeon, then male, it was just almost automatic.
Yeah, they couldn't even think that it was the mother.
That it could be the mother.
Mhm, mhm. I'm not going to ask how many of you thought that it was the mother or just kept thinking, well, we didn't have much time. That's wonderful. Thank you.
But and implicit bias might be so insidious that the one and the same person may hold two contradictory attitudes. Like I like all the people as a reflective attitude, and implicitly all this bad. And truly it's happening. Even one can be biased against their own group, like being middle-aged and thinking, well, young is better.
Mhm. Yeah.
I've got a funny anecdote. Well, my mother-in-law ended up in hospital when she came to stay with us. She's English, and she couldn't speak any French. So I went with her in the ambulance to the hospital to interpret for her. And when we got to the ER, the emergency to casualty, the doctor hadn't seen my mother-in-law yet. She just looked at me, and a nurse said, "It's okay, she's here to interpret." And the doctor was like, "Great, okay, fine." And then she let me go in, and then she asked what language my mother-in-law spoke, and I said English, and she looked at me, she said, "Well, I can speak English. You're not needed." And it was like she'd assumed, well, she didn't think I was an English interpreter. She sort of took one look at my face and thought I must be interpreting a completely different language. And for me, that was this a similar thing, you know, this bias, just, you know, even on somebody's appearance, you know, it's basically everywhere, you know, it's
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's sort of the assumption that it couldn't possibly be English, you know. It's
I think I used to, when I was starting to read about bias a few years ago, I was one of these people thinking, "Oh, I can't possibly have any bias," and things like that. What we do, we have, and
Everyone has
it horrified me that we all have very deep-seated biases. What's the plural? Biases.
biases, I would say.
Biases.
You,
But they can be fixed as well. You're absolutely right. But they have to be identified first before they are addressed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a matter of awareness. It's like we all have our ontologies, our basic beliefs, and until we identify them, we just run in automatic, and that's all ingrained in us. And yeah, and it's a responsibility, I think, in order to become really diverse individuals. And well, it taps into what we were trying, like elevate the patient voice. If we want to elevate the patient voice, we are the first ones, I guess, who need to consider our own biases and where we are not integrating different diversities and aspects. And that really takes a profound psychological process that we need to be willing to do it and to question our own prejudices and biases, for sure.
We are afraid
think-
of our own. I forgot what to say. We are afraid of our own fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't handle your fear. You are blocked because you are afraid of facing Rachel. She looks different.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
though she's kind of similar to French people, I think. Huh? They look like Rachel, but she was afraid anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the fear in us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think elevating the patient voice takes courage, but courage to face our shadow, let's say, because that taps into shadow work, psychological shadow work, and to see the lights and shadows of patient and doctor relationship, our own projections, and all these dynamics. Yes, because we heal as we heal personal trauma or illness as trauma as well. We heal community trauma because we are carrying it. When we get sick, we bring all the community, let's say, way of living those illnesses and considering them traumatic. There may be communities where they say a diagnosis of I don't know, multiple sclerosis, which is my example, may not be as terrible in other communities, that it's like a death sentence and living with, you know, a terrible life and your life has just ended. And that's what we carry, and we need to be aware that we are not just individuals, but we live with our entire community. We are our entire community, and every time we talk with someone else, we are not just us, it's our own lineage, community, traumas that we carry, and we just dump it on the other person. And yeah, and I think it's awareness that's the key, at least to me, what you said. If I may have your permission, Natalie has a question, and maybe we can give her
Well,
the
I don't
space
have
to ask
a question, but I wanted to
or share
just share
something.
some thoughts. I will try not to take sides and be less biased, but I think that energetically, the healthcare professional is the one who should stand bigger in front of the patient, and not because the doctor is more important than us, but because he's more educated, more knowledgeable, and he's the one who should educate the patient. And he's the one who should also take more responsibility, because he's taking the lead to cure us or to find at least the right treatment for us. This is my point.
And this is, you basically supported all of our points by the fact that your view clashes with the patient empowerment view, because you know that it's not correct in your cultural context.
Yeah, and yes, and I wanted to share something, especially for my country here, that I found a bias when it comes to diagnosis here in Bulgaria. For example, if one is suffering from cancer, the doctors here, they usually will not reveal this information to the patient, or they will reveal it to some point, to some extent, but they will not share to this patient that he is in his last stage of his life. They will hide from him. The relatives usually will ask the doctor not to share this information with the patient, and it's really terrible, because this patient would like to complete something in his life, to finish some important things, but he would not have the chance to do it, because he will not know this is probably the last weeks or the last months of his life. And I have a lot of examples in my life. A lot of friends of my father died like this. One is dying at the moment. He's suffering a lot, but he doesn't know. He doesn't know that he's in the last stage of his life. And the other paradox, when you here in Bulgaria, when you suffer from a chronic illness, for example, from a chronic disease, and I can bring my own example here. I was suffering from trigeminal neuralgia for more than 10 years, and it was terrible. Every day was terrible. But since it did not threaten me physically, only mentally and emotionally, the doctor said to me and my mother, you will actually you will never find a cure about this. You will live with this pain until the end of your life, and yeah, that's it. And afterwards, I had to calm my mother down, and a few years later, I found the cure. I'm almost fully recovered from this. But yes, I just wanted to share this kind of bias in the diagnosis you may meet here.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing this, really, and for giving voice to what is happening in your country, in Bulgaria. And I wanted to say, well, regarding your first comment, that the doctor should be, let's say, above the patient because he's the one that knows. I think it's both things. It's like, yes, the doctors know more about medicine, but the patient is the one who knows about their body. Patients are the ones that know about, they have the direct experience. And in the same way that we have our PROs and our clean rows, it's really PROs are symptoms, and as much as you want to observe the signs, you are not inside the patient. So it's always, let's say there's a distance, and if you are not inside, you can really not understand because you're not having the direct experience. So to me, it's humility in both cases necessary, and both at the same level together working, because both are knowledgeable. One, because it's the theory and knows the techniques and can help. The other one, because it's the one that has wisdom. The doctor has knowledge, but the patient has wisdom because it's the direct experience of life with the disease, let's say. Or we can say, if we consider, maybe I can correct myself, that wisdom is knowledge and experience. We have the doctor who has the knowledge and the patient who has the experience. And if you put them together, you have the wisdom to know how to cure and have healing for the patient. And it's when you have both together. Some patients may have knowledge as well, and some doctors may have experience as well, because they themselves have had that illness, right? But I think it's two pieces of an entire whole that need to come together, and not one above the other. It doesn't mean that for some actions, one is going to be above, it's going to lead. More than being above or below, it's a matter of the patient is going to trust in the doctor's knowledge, and for a time it's going to lead, but it's not like a boss in a dominating
Yes,
agent.
for sure, not
But
like
it's
a boss.
leader.
Yeah.
A true leader always listens to the people that he's leading and considering and readjusting. And other times it's going to be the patient who's going to lead the doctor in how to proceed, because it needs to be like that. So it's like a dance between both of them, and it's a dance of trust. The doctor also needs to trust the patient's symptoms.
I
and
think that
experience.
here the responsibility was the one who stays more with the doctor. I think a bit more, just a bit more.
For me, that's where I don't agree, because it's in the end it's the patient's life, and that's the responsibility of you know. But we know now that we are not individuals and isolated, and that's a very, very westernized view. We are community, we are family, we exist by sharing. We couldn't survive if we were alone in the world, and so on. But the ultimate responsibility, I understand, legally, depending on the country, it's going to be that the patient. But for me, it's really a shared responsibility, not above or below. But again, the doctor may have to make a decision. It's in a surgery, he's operating or she's operating. Let's say the mother of this child is operating, and she needs to assume the responsibility and make choices. And in that moment, that doctor has the responsibility.
Yeah.
But in other moments, so it's a fluctuating responsibility, and in the end, it's really a shared process. So which is never perfect, of course.
I would like to say something.
Mm-hmm.
I have had cognitive debriefing groups with rare diagnosis, and I'm not sure who is deciding which diagnosis will have the treatments and actually having the diagnosis. Because in Sweden, I have seen, for instance, a group that some of them went to US to be diagnosed and be treated with their own money, because in Sweden they refused to treat them. And so the community and the healthcare providers are not for everyone in the country. I find it very, I don't know, I don't even find the word for it. I think everyone, even though it's a small group, the medication may be expensive. Most of us in the society are healthy people and not using the healthcare system. So why shouldn't the small groups be diagnosed and treated? I have an example, for instance, that's a diagnosis, but the cystic fibrosis. They came on medication, I think about 2015, international. Then Denmark brought it and gave it to their patients with results, perfectly results. They were treated almost 100%. Norway and Sweden, they found this medication too expensive. So in Sweden and Norway, they are not getting the treatment. So that's one point out of it too, where we are discussing. Who is actually deciding if I'm going to get the treatment or not?
Well, that takes us directly to shared decision making, or the second myth or assumption. But I think I was really interested in what Natalie had to say about the position of the doctor and the knowledge gap between the doctor and the patient, and that's absolutely true. But the kind of the industry, the pharma or CRO version of the patient voice is the fact that everybody is the same everywhere. So that version of patient empowerment should be the same everywhere, regardless of cultural differences and just how healthcare works. Because the reason why doctors occupy that position in Bulgaria is a reflection on that specific health system. So if we could go straight into the shared decision making, my assumption is, or the assumption is that the doctor and the patient are arriving at a decision with regard to treatment. So it's basically, do you want treatment A or treatment B? But just like Eva says, they don't know. The treatment C, D, and E are not presented because of cost, because in that particular health scenario, it's only A and B. And there could also be treatments F, G, and H, but these are non-drug treatments. It could be go for a walk, have a picnic in the park or something like that. That might be better for your mental health than taking fluoxetine or something like that. And so if you have a look at the inner workings of the healthcare professional patient interaction, as in looking at video analysis of real consultations, you see that there's a certain choreography to the doctor-patient encounter. And you can see that when you look at it in minute detail, for example, through ethnography or ethnomethodology, you can see that the doctor is shepherding the patient to make either A or B. A, B, which is it? And the patient, if you have a look at their behavior, is attunement to that choreography And rather than the doctor looking after making sure that the patient is making the best decision in their interests, it's actually the patient who is attending to the authority of the doctor. So that's not too different to how Natalie described it. It's just that maybe in the West, or at least in the UK, doctor-patient encounters are more dishonest than they are, you know.
Rachel, would you like to add something?
In what way would you say they're dishonest in the UK?
No, I didn't mean that the doctors or the patients are being dishonest, but the interaction is.
The interactions.
Because it's on a surface level, it's supposed to be shared decision making is happening, but in actual fact, there's a dance, just like you say, and that dance corresponds more to how Natalie describes it. If you really look at the inner workings of the doctor-patient consultation, then so it completely betrays a lie to the fact that shared decision making is happening because the patient is shepherded to A or B. That's it.
Yes, this dance that I talk about is an ideal. It's a utopia. Well, in some situations it happens. I have experienced that but only with integrative medicine doctors or functional medicine doctors or doctors that are, let's say, tapping into that. That's my direct experience that I can speak of. And it's really amazing when that happens because you can open yourself more, be more vulnerable, ask for help, and you feel heard. And then you can see, I don't know, let's say an open horizon before you, and not everything is so dark anymore. So it's really, I mean, I would like to add an optimistic tone because there are many doctors that are really amazing and nurses, and it's happening. And well, it's a start as everything else.
But I would describe you as the quintessentially empowered patient. Really you are. And also because you're also from a healthcare professional background yourself, so that makes you quite atypical as a patient. But I'm telling you that
it's the weird case. That's why I say it's a utopia, because in my case, I used to try to empower my own patients first, and then, but it took me a long time to empower myself as patient. And I always found that relationship that Natalie mentions, and I always felt down below and scared, and that my voice was not heard at all. And it takes a lot of courage to, let's say, to voice. And I took that courage thanks to community. I wouldn't have been able to do it alone. So yeah, and just to wrap up, I would like to ask you about equity. If you could just mention, because we have been tapping, like, intertwined all this empowerment, shared decision making, and equity. But would you like to add something more, Mark, in this sense?
I think so basically, if patient empowerment isn't happening and shared decision making isn't happening, that has a direct effect into equity of in terms of health outcomes as well, and not just access to health. And I remember I think Rachel and I were talking about in the early weeks of the COVID pandemic, we were all, the press and the medical community were wringing their hands in shame. And that means just mortified by the fact that there was such a disproportionate amount of certain sectors of the population who were dying from COVID. and in a lot of people described COVID as shining a mirror to us. We basically were seeing us. One of the things that was laid bare was the level of inequality in inequality in terms of access to health, and inequality in terms of empowerment and everything else that leads up to really poor health outcomes. So there were disproportionate amounts of specific ethnic minorities that were dying of COVID, and the press even tried to blame them. The press tried to blame them and their bodies. It was to do with vitamin K deficiency. It was to do with vitamin D deficiency. It was to do with some kind of genetic predisposition to a respiratory disease or dying from. When in actual fact it was because they're living in poverty, or they are living in multi-generational households, or they were doing, more crucially, they were doing jobs where they had to go out when everybody was locked in, and therefore be exposed to the virus. And that is the perfect illustration of what inequality is in health.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also it depends where you are as well, because it can be a bit of a postcode lottery as well as to what drugs are authorized in different parts of the country. I think in France drugs are authorized on a national level, so technically it's not the same, but no, it's I've seen that with family in the UK having different care, different options available. So how can there be equity if the same options aren't available to everybody?
And it's not just healthcare; it's social care as well.
Yeah.
So I think the UK is one of the only OECD countries that haven't worked out how to integrate social care and healthcare. It's pretty alarming, really.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's another example of inequity.
Mm-hmm.
Arletta, would you like to add? Yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask you, because I wanted to know your views.
Maybe because the strong stereotyping that certain communities are equated with that those communities have certain magical beliefs, that others are equated with socioeconomic status, like poverty, and that kicks in a tunnel vision that for those people we have option A, B. For those people we may consider A, B, C, and for those one, well, we may offer A, and that's it. That might be also the problem, and it probably this stereotyping activates just automatically because of a person that has certain traits.
And it brings in your point about bias as well perfectly. It's at the core of a lot of what we're discussing.
Mm-hmm. And that's why in certain regions, I know in the US, medical staff are required to complete continuous education on implicit bias, just to raise awareness and make them realize that it's a real thing. And if someone is implicitly biased toward certain communities, most often than not, they tend to rate these people, like, for example, Black communities and people from Black communities. like less communicative. The doctors tend to shorten consultation, then they tend to be more dominant when it comes to communication, and as a result it may lead to patient to less adherence, let's say, to a medical advice, and less trust on the end of the patient.
And there are massive misunderstandings about how, I mean, it's unbelievable we're saying this in 2025, that assumptions about how Black people experience pain. I mean, that's very well documented.
And it's harrowing that it kicks in automatically. That there are examples that physicians that volunteer to help and assist Black communities are implicitly biased against these very communities. That's because we are just steeped in our culture, and our mind just pick up and attitudes that are pervasive in a culture, that this pull towards some rooted attitude and ingrained in culture are almost impossible to resist.
And then, you know, if we bring it back to clinical studies, CROs are wondering why they can't recruit enough Black people in clinical trials. I mean, there's other historical reasons for that as well, but it is just about this being on the receiving end of this just ongoing bias.
I know from personal experience, I've, you know, as a person of colour, I don't know, I think I've always, you know, with my family background, we've always, I don't know, had an idea of not making a fuss. We don't want to, you know, we don't want to be noticed. We don't want to draw people's attention to us, not to make a big fuss. So, you know, that's been a problem medical wise, you know, actually, in my own family, often we've not sought medical advice until it's actually quite serious, because we don't want to, you know, because I know my mum has had quite negative experiences. I have had negative experiences in hospitals as well, and I don't know if it was to do with sort of racism or something like that, or if I was being treated differently, but you know, I was very aware that you know, it never went well if I did make a fuss. So you know, things like pain, you know, when I did need pain relief, I was told I couldn't possibly need pain relief because I looked fine, you know, but I was probably, you know, I was good at hiding it or something. It's absolutely ridiculous, you know. But yeah, it's
and this paternalistic model, it's still strong, that there is a doctor above and the patient who accepts or even adopt submissive position, that there is a difference in relation, that one is above another.
I see.
When I said above the other, a bit bigger, I didn't mean that this person should be, the doctor should have a bossy behavior to the patient, but just a little bit above, because of all the knowledge and education and everything related to his profession as a doctor. This is what I mean. I wanted just to point it out, and not because he's you know, the very important and bossy person, and he needs to order what the patient to do or not to do. This is what I mean.
And I agree with you, because medical staff, they have this technical knowledge, and they but at the same time, either argue that the onus is on them to foster or try to instill confidence and emotional relational competence on the end of the patient, for the patient to be able to trust the medical staff to call shots for them, to present the options as they are, and for the patient to be able to choose from all the options available to them, and to have trust in their doctor or nurse.
It has to do also with the paradigm that we have, the medical paradigm that we are using, where the belief is that the doctor is the one curing the patient, where there's other kind of medicine that believes that is the power of the patient and is the facilitating of the doctor, that it's bringing the healing process into, for to occur. So we are assuming that the doctor is the curing agent, when a nurse knows that a wound is really healed by the very body of the patient with the facilitation of the process. So the doctor is, of course, super important and for the cure to occur, but the true agent is the body reacting to all that help and assistance and enhancement. And I see that that's where we need to question those paradigms, and maybe, well, again, I'm into integrative medicine. So integrative medicine considers that it's the terrain of the patient, and also, of course, the knowledge of the doctors as facilitators of healing. But and they don't look at illness as much as health and how to bring back the balance into that dis-ease that is happening. But to me also, I was thinking about all this miscommunication between patient and doctors, and the nurse, the role of the nurse as mediator, because when we have a conflict, we need a mediator, and the importance of nurses as being in between and being able to be a bridge into this maybe relational experience between patient and or other healthcare members that can be in between and can work as a bridge. And I think, Eva, you may have experience in this, like bringing the patient closer to the doctor and the doctor closer to the patient so that healing can occur. And we sometimes talk about doctors, and we miss the important role of the nurse, who is the one that is directly in touch with the patient every day, and is the one listening, and is the one directly caring, right? As well.
I would like to say the doctor's education is based on research. So they are mostly all the way far away from the patient. They want to have a good statistic of the research they are going through. And that you can see also in the clinic. Of course, they are busy, but maybe they should evaluate their busyness and be more doctors to cover all aspects he has to cover. He can't only excuse himself being busy somewhere else. Then it's too short of staff, I would say. And I have an example of a doctor. He was a surgeon. I shouldn't mention what type of surgery, maybe. But anyhow, he was very quick in his surgery. He was the best in time, statistically, he was the best. But he always had bleedings, post-operative bleeding, so he has to reoperate to handle the bleeding. But that guy, he was not welcomed on the ward because he could not at all talk to the patients. So he had stayed in the operating theater and did the operation, never on the ward.
Yours. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that
Well,
may be the situation too.
well, we need to close the the episode because we could continue. We will have more episodes on of course, on patient voice research.
Everybody's gone.
Yes, because we have passed way beyond the hour. But well, some have stayed
Oh,
here,
yes.
holding the flame. What would you? I wanted to ask you just to close maybe this. What would you tell a patient? What would you like to elevate the voice? What would be your suggestion, your advice, and if you could think of something or recommend?
I would argue that to amplify the voice and make sure that the patient and their voice is heard, and to lessen the implicit bias is to practice camera exercise, just to look at the person, to look at the patient and differentiate what we are observing from our interpretation. Just observe and don't assign any interpretation to what is observed. And that might hopefully lessen bias towards the patient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, don't put layers on the patient. Don't let the patient really report what they are feeling.
And don't assign any attributes that might not be the truth about this patient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from previous experiences or previous patients. No, just really see that person as unique in their own experience.
That it is not true that every Black person is this and that it is not true that every middle-aged person is this or that, and that, for example, we have certain medical beliefs. Just to be open and try to look at this person not through the lenses that are activated automatically because someone is of color, or someone might be looked as if poor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or aged, even if they have 85 years old, not because
or
you had other patients of that age and didn't work. Just
yeah, or maybe they are not so apt to communicate in a foreign language for them. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that they are not able to understand medical advice.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Who goes next?
I'll say if I was, I've been in positions where I've been really intimidated by doctors before I got involved in this type of work, and I think the more I get to know doctors, as people, some of them are quite screwed up people, really. And so I would say to patients that, you are their equal. You are their equal. You probably live a more wholesome life than them, to be honest. So you tell them their story. You tell them your story, rather.
Yeah. We put ourselves in the level of human,
Mhm.
right? And not those roles that separate us. In this case, your role, I respect you and I honor what you know and that you can help me. And I'm here because I want your help. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here, right? But I have value and I'm enough just as I am. And even though I may not know all that you know, I know about other things and I have other experiences, and my experiences are as rich and as honorable. Yeah.
That's perfectly put. I couldn't have put that better.
Thanks for sharing that. Eva, would you like to?
Being a patient is a very exposed situation in many ways. And also it depends on who you meet, because it can vary very much, both among nurses as well as among doctors. So being sick is not a good option, I would say. It's a struggle for many. And how to handle that, it's not one solution, because it depends on the interaction between people, how you reach the other one and how the other one reach you in a communication discussion situation. Because if someone is arrogant and talking medical terminology, then he doesn't want to be connected with you. He's overriding you. So I can recommend a patient search for another one, a second opinion, as you talk about in medical environments. Then maybe you will find, hopefully you will find someone you can communicate with. I never visit doctors. I have problems. I have post-COVID, but I've never been to a doctor for it. That's my attitude.
Yeah. Well, you are the example of an empowered patient as well. Yeah, sometimes we knock on doors that just don't open, and we expect people to help us where they just can't. Even, their own exhaustion, traumas, or their own fears, or lack of empathy, and we just want that person to love us, let's say, and it just sometimes doesn't happen, and we really need to knock to a different door and understand that we are not going to get help there. And it's okay. It's okay to just not everybody's ready to give. Yeah, thank you. Rachel, would you like to add your experience and
I would say
advice?
To patients not to be afraid, not to be afraid to use their voice, and also to know that they're not alone. And through the cognitive debriefing work, I'm discovering this whole world of patient advocacy groups, patient associations, and there are so many amazing people out there that are really knowledgeable, that can give really valuable support, I think, to patients. And I think that's really, it's good to find their community, for whatever illness, whatever condition, there's a community out there that can help, of other human beings that have been through what you're going through. So,
yeah,
I think it's
yeah. I think we can leave it here with really the feeling of community that can hold you and help you through all the challenges of illness and the path towards healing and possibly curing as well. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Really, it was amazing, and we can be for hours and days talking about this. Thank you for those who have shared your views. Thank you, Marcy, doggies included, and all people who are watching. Really, thank you for your time and for listening, and to you especially, Mark, Arletta, and Eva, for your precious insights and for bringing light to this challenging topic. But at least, let's say, we have added a small piece in the same piece, no, to this patient voice revolution. Thank you, Rachel, for your precious help as well, and see you in the next Linguistic Validation Café. Sorry, Patient Voice and Linguistic Validation Café, because we have renamed. And thank you so much to our sponsor, Gibson Research Consultancy. Thanks, Mark. Really.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and especially to our community of the Patient Voice and Linguistic Validation Café, since this is a joint venture and its creation is the result of all of us together. The Patient Voice and Linguistic Validation Café is an informal monthly gathering within the Art of Diversity training program, brought to you by Gibson Research Consultancy.